my last video called Carl Jung's Archetype versus Richard Dawkins' Meme, many in the comments requested that I go over the potential scientific evidence for archetypes, or at least concepts, theories and findings, which I think could be relevant for future research into the Jungian theory. So in this video I will be going over scientific discoveries within epigenetics, neuroscience and some controversial theories regarding biology that could place a framework for future archetypal research. The DNA phantom effect. Solid scientific research that lends support not only for Sheldrake's morphic field theory, but maybe even as proof for Jung's universal and hereditary archetypes, can be found by the results of groundbreaking research done in 1995 by scientist Vladimir Poponin at the Russian Academy of Sciences. Referred to as the DNA phantom effect, Poponin's findings provide solid scientific evidence that DNA affects the behavior of reality during and after its presence. Under the research of quantum physics, this could provide evidence to find a pathway into future research for Jungian archetypes. In summary, Poponin and researchers made a vacuum out of a glass tube that only contained photons of light. The photons of light were scattered about the tube randomly. They then took a piece of human DNA and inserted it into the tube. When the human DNA was inserted into the tube, the light photons did something unpredicted. They moved and organized themselves around the piece of DNA, forming into an organized pattern. The scientists were shocked by this. After viewing this, they hypothesized that when the human DNA was removed from the tube, that the light photons would go back to being random and disorganized as they were before. However, what they found was exactly the opposite. When the human DNA was removed from the tube, the light photons remained in the organized pattern in the exact same location as if the DNA was still present. What Poponin concluded from this experiment was profound. The human DNA contains around it some sort of field or organizing body of information that has an effect on the external physical environment. Thus our DNA can in some way construct our own reality. Now the controversial one, morphogenetics. Rupert Sheldrake, who coined this concept, referred to this DNA field, let's say, as a morphogenetic field, and suggests that morphogenetic fields work by imposing patterns on otherwise random or interdeterminate patterns of activity, and that they are transmitted from past members of the species through a kind of non-local resonance called morphic resonance, and that these morphic fields underlie our mental activity and our perceptions. The DNA phantom effect findings and Sheldrake's morphic field theories provide some groundwork towards the inquiry for the existence of Jung's archetypes, but obviously there is a lot of work that needs to be done here in both terms of validity and theoretical approach. Sheldrake has also noted similarities between morphic resonance and Carl Jung's collective unconscious, with regard to collective memories being shared across individuals and the coalescing of particular behaviours through repetition, described by Jung as archetypes. However, whereas Jung assumed that archetypal forms were transmitted through physical inheritance, Sheldrake attributes collective memories to morphic resonance, and rejects any explanation of them involving what he terms mechanistic biology. Sheldrake's ideas are very controversial, but he does provide empirical evidence for his scientific theories, and they seem reliable and valid to a certain degree.
Morphic resonance is a connection across time from the past to the present. And it's a process that occurs between organized patterns of activity on the basis of similarity. What it means, in effect, is that each species has a kind of collective memory. So every giraffe tunes in by morphic resonance to the form and to the behavior of previous giraffes. Every crystal, as it crystallizes, tunes in to the way that previous crystals of the same chemical crystallized in the past. So there's a kind of memory given by morphic resonance in all kinds of things. And in the realm of animal behavior, for example, it leads to quite striking predictions. If rats learn a new trick here in London, then rats all around the world should be able to learn the same trick quicker, just because the rats have learned it here. The more that learn it, the easier it should get everywhere else. And there's already evidence that this actually happens from studies of rats in laboratories. When lots of rats have learned something, other rats all around the world find it easier to learn. And this doesn't depend on any normal kind of connection between the different rats or the places. It happens because of morphic resonance on the basis of similarity. The same applies to crystals. When a new chemical is made for the first time, it's usually very hard to crystallize it. And as time goes on, it gets easier to crystallize all around the world. And I think the reason for this is that morphic resonance connects up the crystals so they tune into a kind of collective memory. So morphic resonance works through morphic fields, the organizing fields of chemicals and biological systems. And the word morphic comes from the Greek word for form. So it's a kind of resonance to do with form, pattern, and organization.
Another I thought was relevant was genomic imprinting. Modern-day epigenetic research may prove that Jung was correct when he claimed that universal, societal, and individual experiences are both instinctual and hereditary. While Jung did not have the scientific modern language to describe exactly how this occurs, we now understand that this may happen through what is known in the scientific epigenetic community as genomic imprinting, where the memories and experiences of our ancestors could be passed along to us through the genetic line. This phenomenon causes genes to be expressed in a parent of origin specific manner. It is a process that involves DNA methylation and histone methylation, without altering the genetic sequence. These epigenetic marks are imprinted in the germline of the parents and are maintained through mitotic cell divisions in the somatic cells of an organism. Now obviously this is not an example of evidence of archetypes, but I think it is definitely a speck of biological research that will act as a foundation for the further investigation and maybe even towards objective evidence towards archetypes. Because genomic imprinting is a scientific fact that's objective, unlike the other theories that I've talked about, which are only empirical of the research done so far. Now let's get on to the neuroscience. Peterson said the following in an interview where he brings up a study that supposedly supports the archetypal concept. Now let's get this right. He is wrong in saying that it does give evidence for archetypes. It only gives evidence for selectivized pre-structuring the brain. This is what he says.
So there was a new article, I think it was published in Nature, I'll try to find the link for it, it's about a year old, that was based on high-resolution imaging of neuronal connections. It's actually reviewed in Kurzweil's book, How to Build a Mind, I think that's the name of it. And so it turns out that the cortex is made out of these columnar structures that are pre-organized units of neurons, and they're replicated across the entire cortex. It's basically the same structure. And like the older, let's say, connectionist idea was that neurons that fire together wire together, right? That's Hebb, and of course that's pretty standard neurology, but the columns are already pre-wired, so it's actually columns that fire together, that wire together, but there's even more with the high-resolution scanning. So it turns out that underneath the columnar structure, there are these pre-built highways that are connective tissue that are pre-prepared, so the columns have the option to connect to the underlying highway, and then that highway can connect to other columns. So it's as if implicit in the brain organization, and this is at the cortical level, say nothing of subcortical organization, there's already pre-existent likelihoods that certain neurons will wire together. Yeah, so and what else is cool is that this is actually architecturally quite regular. So they found that these superhighways are arranged in lines and at right angles to one another. So it's almost like a three-dimensional structure of wired cubes that underlies the neuronal structure. So that's some neurological evidence for the archetypal idea.
If anyone knows of this particular study he's talking about, please put it in the comments below. So I hope this was interesting. There I've gone over the DNA phantom effect, morphogenetics, genomic imprinting within epigenetics, and pre-structuring of neuronal connections within neuroscience that I think could potentially act as groundworks for developing evidence into archetypes, at its most basic explanation being that there are certain behaviours that are acted out and are inherited through an evolutionary progression. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment your thoughts down below, and subscribe for more content on philosophy and psychology. Thanks for watching.